Winter, 1542. Inside the cold stone walls of the Tower of London, a young girl kneels before a wooden execution block. She is only 19 years old. Her hands tremble slightly, yet her face remains strangely calm. She slowly lowers her head onto the block. Then she lifts it again. A moment passes, and she repeats the motion. No guard is forcing her. No executioner is standing nearby. No crowd is watching. A young queen is practicing the moment of her own death. Her name is Catherine Howard, the queen of King Henry VIII. Only 3 months earlier, she had lived surrounded by music, silk, and golden candlelight inside the royal chambers of Hampton Court. The king adored her. The court admired her beauty. For a brief moment, she was the most powerful young woman in England. But the Tudor court was a dangerous place, where admiration could turn into accusation overnight. One secret letter appeared, a quiet accusation about the queen's past. Soon the men who once knew her began to disappear into dark prison cells. Interrogations began. Old memories were dragged into the light, twisted into evidence of betrayal against the crown. In only 3 months, a girl who once wore a crown would walk toward the execution block waiting for her in silence. But the real question is not how she died. The real question is what happened during those 3 terrible months that forced a young queen to practice her own execution. If you want to uncover the darkest secrets of royal history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for the story that follows. Late one autumn evening in the year 1541, the palace was quiet. The long corridors of Hampton Court were lit only by flickering candlelight, and most of the court had already retired for the night. Servants moved softly through the halls, careful not to disturb the king. In a private chamber, a man sat alone with a letter in his hands. His name was Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a man known for caution, loyalty, and a deep understanding of how dangerous the Tudor court could be. The letter he had just received was not long, but every line inside it carried the weight of disaster. It did not accuse the queen of plotting against the king. It did not claim treason in the usual sense. The accusation was something far more delicate, and perhaps even more dangerous. The letter spoke about the past of Catherine Howard. Specifically, it described relationships she had before becoming the wife of the king. In most places, such stories might have been dismissed as gossip, but in Tudor England, the reputation of a queen was tied directly to the honor of the crown. If the queen had hidden parts of her past before marrying the king, the marriage itself could be considered a deception. And if the king had been deceived, the consequences could be fatal. Cranmer read the letter again and again. Each time he finished it, the danger seemed greater. Accusing a queen without proof could destroy him, but ignoring the accusation, if it later proved true, could also ruin him. He needed a way to tell the king without appearing to accuse the queen directly. That night, he made a careful decision. The king, Henry VIII, was known to spend time alone in prayer before sleeping. While the king knelt in a private chapel, Cranmer quietly entered the royal chamber. No announcement was made. No witnesses were called. He placed the folded letter beneath the king's pillow. Then he left the room in silence. Hours later, Henry returned. The candles burned low as he prepared for rest. As he reached for his pillow, his hand touched the folded parchment. The king opened the letter and began to read. At first, his expression remained calm, but as his eyes moved from line to line, the color slowly drained from his face. The woman he had trusted, the young queen who had brought life back into his aging court, was now the center of a dangerous accusation. Within that quiet chamber, in the middle of the night, the stability of the English crown began to tremble. The letter lay open in the hands of the king, and the silence in the chamber felt heavier than the stone walls around him. The accusations were dangerous, but to understand why they mattered, one must step back many years, long before a crown ever touched the head of Catherine Howard. Long before she became queen, she was simply a young girl growing up in a powerful family that rarely paid attention to her. Catherine belonged to the vast Howard clan, one of the most influential noble families in England. Yet influence did not guarantee care. As a child, she was sent to live in the household of her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. The great house was full of young relatives, wards, and servants. It was a lively place, but not a carefully watched one. Discipline was loose, supervision was rare, and the young people living there were often left to guide themselves. For a teenage girl, it was a dangerous freedom. Catherine was lively, curious, and eager for affection. She was also very young. In the crowded household, friendships formed easily, secrets were shared quickly, and boundaries were often ignored. One of the first men to notice her was Henry VIII, a music tutor who spent time teaching the young women of the house. He was older, confident, and experienced in a world Catherine barely understood. Their relationship began quietly, hidden behind lessons and private conversations. To them, it may have felt like harmless attention, but in the strict moral world of Tudor society, even small indiscretions could carry enormous consequences. Eventually, the relationship ended, but Catherine had already stepped into a dangerous pattern. Not long afterward, another man entered her life, a secretary working within the household named Francis Derham. Unlike the earlier flirtation, this connection appeared deeper and far more serious. They spent long hours together, shared private promises, and spoke to each other with the familiarity of people who believed they had a future. In the lively and poorly supervised house of Agnes Howard, very few people interfered. At the time, these moments may have seemed like nothing more than youthful mistakes, whispers between two young people in a crowded home. But years later, when Catherine rose to the throne beside the most powerful king in England, those forgotten memories would return, and what once felt like innocent secrets would slowly transform into evidence that could destroy a queen. Years passed, and the careless days inside the household of Agnes Howard slowly faded into memory. The young girl who once wandered through crowded halls with little guidance would soon enter a world far more dangerous than she could imagine. That world was the royal court of King Henry VIII. By the late 1600s, the king was no longer the powerful golden prince he had once been. Age, illness, and disappointment had changed him. His body was heavy, his temper unpredictable, and his court filled with quiet rivalries. Many nobles watched the king carefully, hoping to gain influence or favor through whatever path they could find. Into this tense world stepped Catherine Howard. She arrived as a young lady serving the queen, a small figure among the elegant women who surrounded the royal household. Yet it did not take long for people to notice her. She was young, graceful, and full of energy. In a court that had grown heavy with politics and caution, her laughter and bright presence felt almost refreshing. The king noticed her too. At that moment, Henry was married to another queen, but the marriage had brought him little happiness. The court could see the difference between the tired king and the lively young woman who now moved through his halls. When Catherine entered a room, attention followed her. Henry began to watch her more closely. Soon he spoke to her more often, inviting her to stand near him during celebrations and court gatherings. The king, who had grown used to disappointment, suddenly seemed revived by the presence of someone young and vibrant. Those close to him later said that Catherine made him feel young again. In the summer of 1540, everything changed. The king ended his previous marriage and turned his full attention toward the young woman who had captured his imagination. Not long afterward, Catherine Howard was crowned Queen of England. She was only a teenager, suddenly placed beside the most powerful ruler in the kingdom. To the king, she was a source of joy, someone he proudly called his rose without a thorn. But inside the Tudor court, rapid rise often attracted silent resentment. Powerful families watched carefully, measuring the influence of the new queen. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, studying every detail of her past. Because in a court where power was fragile and ambition was everywhere, those who rose quickly rarely remained safe for long. The royal court appeared calm on the surface. Music filled the halls, banquets continued, and the young queen moved gracefully beside the king. To many observers, the marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine Howard seemed full of warmth. But beneath the polished surface of court life, something quiet and dangerous was beginning to emerge. During the investigations that followed the accusations against the queen, one name slowly began to appear in several testimonies. At first, it was mentioned carefully, almost hesitantly. Yet the more officials listened, the more often the same name returned. That name was Thomas Culpeper. Culpeper was not an ordinary courtier. He held a trusted position close to the king himself. Henry had known him for years and believed him to be loyal. In a court where trust was rare, Culpeper had managed to earn a place near the center of royal power, which made the rumors surrounding him even more troubling. Witnesses began describing private meetings between Culpeper and the queen. Messages passed quietly between attendants. Conversations arranged late in the evening, after the court had settled into silence. The meetings did not happen openly in crowded halls. Instead, they were said to take place in more secluded corners of the royal residences. Doors closed, voices lowered, servants standing guard to ensure no one entered unexpectedly. Those who later reported these moments did not always agree on the details. Some claimed the meetings were brief conversations. Others hinted that the connection between the queen and Culpeper felt far more personal. Yet the truth remained uncertain. No one could clearly prove what had actually happened behind those closed doors. No witness could describe exactly what passed between them during those private moments. But the Tudor court was not a place where certainty was always required. Reputation alone could shape the fate of powerful people. And in the case of a queen, even the smallest suspicion could become a matter of national danger. The idea that the young queen might have shared secret meetings with a man trusted by the king was enough to send shock through the court. In Tudor England, loyalty to the crown was absolute. A queen was expected to represent purity, obedience, and devotion to the king alone. If even a shadow of doubt touched that image, the consequences could be catastrophic. And now that shadow had a name: Thomas Culpeper. The rumors that once moved quietly through the halls of the court were no longer whispers. Once the accusations reached the king, the machinery of royal justice began to move with frightening speed. In Tudor England, when suspicion touched the crown, hesitation could be dangerous. The investigation began quietly, but it did not remain quiet for long. Officials were ordered to gather testimony, question servants, and search through the past of Catherine Howard. Every person who had once lived near her, spoken with her, or served her household suddenly became important. Soon the first arrests began. The man from her earlier life, Francis Derham, was taken into custody. Guards arrived without warning and brought him to a chamber where royal investigators waited. Derham had once been close to Catherine long before she ever stepped into the royal court. Now that connection placed him in terrible danger. Not long afterward, another arrest followed. Thomas Culpeper, the trusted gentleman of the king, was also seized. The news shocked many within the court. Culpeper had enjoyed the confidence of the king himself. Seeing him taken away under guard sent a chilling message through the palace. No one was beyond suspicion. The arrests did not stop there. Servants from the Queen household were questioned one by one. Ladies in waiting were called before investigators. Messengers, attendants, and even minor household workers were brought in to answer questions. Each conversation focused on the same subject: the past of the Queen, the meetings people might have seen, the words that might have been exchanged. The interrogations grew more intense with each passing day. Investigators compared every statement carefully. If one witness mentioned a meeting, they searched for another person who might confirm it. If someone remembered a letter, they asked who might have carried it. Small memories that once seemed unimportant suddenly became pieces of evidence. Slowly, a story began to take shape. A story built from fragments of testimony, scattered recollections, and fearful confessions. To the men leading the investigation, these pieces started to form a pattern that suggested something far more serious than careless behavior. They believed they were uncovering a web of deception surrounding the Queen. Inside the court, tension spread quickly. Nobles lowered their voices in conversation. Servants moved through corridors with anxious faces. Everyone understood the same terrifying truth. When the crown began hunting for betrayal, it rarely stopped until someone was destroyed. The investigation had been building for days, gathering statements and piecing together fragments of the past. Inside the court, the tension was now impossible to ignore. Servants whispered in corridors. Nobles watched each other carefully. And the name of Catherine Howard was spoken with growing uncertainty. Then the moment finally came when suspicion turned into action. The Queen was staying at Hampton Court Palace when the order was given. The palace that had once celebrated her beauty and youth was suddenly filled with quiet urgency. Officials moved through the corridors with determined faces, and guards took their positions without explanation. Catherine did not fully understand what was happening at first. The accusations that had begun as distant whispers had now reached her directly. She was informed that the king had been told about the allegations surrounding her past. In that moment, the ground beneath her world seemed to disappear. According to accounts repeated by later witnesses, Catherine reacted with sudden desperation. Realizing the danger she faced, she tried to reach the one person who still held the power to save her, the king himself, Henry VIII. She ran through the palace corridors, calling out, hoping to find him before the guards could stop her. The hallways of Hampton Court, once familiar and filled with celebration, now echoed with her cries. She begged for a chance to speak to the king. Just a few words, a moment to explain, a chance to defend herself. But the guards had already received their orders. They intercepted her before she could reach the royal chambers. Hands seized her arms, and the desperate queen who only months earlier had stood beside the king in public triumph was now treated as a prisoner. Witnesses later described the scene as heartbreaking. The young queen struggling, pleading to see her husband, while soldiers pulled her away from the doors that led to him. Henry never came. Whether he refused to see her or was kept away from the confrontation remains uncertain. What is known is that Catherine never received the meeting she desperately wanted. Within a short time, she was removed from the palace entirely. The gates of Hampton Court closed behind her as the escort carried her away under guard. The young queen who had once filled those halls with laughter would never return again. The carriage carrying Catherine Howard moved slowly through the cold streets of London. Guards surrounded it on every side, their faces expressionless as they guided the fallen queen toward the place that had ended the lives of many powerful figures before her. Ahead of her stood the dark walls of the Tower of London. For centuries, the tower had served as a prison for those who had once stood close to power. Now the young queen who had once ruled beside the king was about to enter those gates not as royalty, but as a prisoner of the crown. When Catherine was brought inside, the heavy doors closed behind her with a final sound that echoed through the stone corridors. The world she had known only months earlier was now far away. The music of court, the bright halls of Hampton Court, the presence of the king, all of it had disappeared. In their place, there was only silence. Days passed slowly inside the tower. Guards watched every movement. Servants were limited. Conversations were controlled. And the queen was left with long hours of uncertainty. She knew the investigation continued outside those walls, and she understood that the fate of several men was now tied to her own. Soon the news began to reach her. The first reports were quiet, almost whispered. The men accused of involvement with the queen were being judged. Among them was Francis Derham, whose past connection to Catherine had become a central part of the accusations. His fate was sealed with brutal finality, a punishment meant to demonstrate the seriousness of betrayal against the crown. Not long afterward, another name reached her ears. Thomas Culpeper had also faced judgment. The once trusted gentleman of the king had lost the protection that position once provided. His downfall confirmed what many within the tower already understood. The crown was determined to erase every shadow connected to the scandal. With each passing day, Catherine heard another piece of news, another life destroyed, another sentence carried out. Each report made the silence of her chamber feel heavier. She no longer needed anyone to explain what was coming. The pattern was clear, and the process was moving steadily forward. One by one, the people connected to the accusations were disappearing. And as the waiting continued inside the tower, Catherine began to realize that the final name on that list would almost certainly be her own. Inside the cold chambers of the Tower of London, time seemed to move slowly for Catherine Howard. The days no longer carried news of hope. Each sunrise only reminded her that the circle of punishment around her was closing. By this stage, the court had already decided her fate, even if the final order had not yet been carried out. Catherine understood the reality of the situation with a clarity that many prisoners never reached. She knew what waited for her. Yet what happened next surprised even the guards who watched over her. During one of the final days of her imprisonment, Catherine made a strange request. She asked for something that no prisoner had ever calmly requested before. She asked for the execution block. At first, the guards were confused. Some believed they had misunderstood her words. But Catherine repeated the request quietly and clearly. She wanted the wooden block that would eventually be used for her execution. When it was finally brought into the chamber, the room fell silent. The young queen approached the block slowly. For a moment, she simply looked at it, studying the rough surface of the wood. Then she knelt beside it. Very gently, she lowered her head onto the block. After a few seconds, she lifted it again. Then she repeated the movement, again and again. The guards watched in disbelief as the 19-year-old queen practiced the final moment of her life. There was no panic, no screaming, only a strange determination to understand exactly how the moment would happen. Perhaps Catherine believed that if she faced the act calmly, she could meet her end with dignity. Or perhaps it was the only way she could regain a small sense of control over a fate already decided by others. Whatever the reason, the young queen continued her quiet rehearsal. And somewhere beyond the walls of the tower, the day of her execution was drawing closer. Morning arrived quietly on the 13th day of February in the year 1542. A pale winter light spread slowly across the ancient stones of the Tower of London. The air was cold, and the fortress that had witnessed so many final moments now prepared for another. Inside one of its guarded chambers, Catherine Howard waited. The young queen who had once walked through royal halls in silk and jewels now stood in a simple gown. She was only 19 years old, yet the fear and confusion of the previous months had slowly settled into a strange calm. When the guards arrived to escort her, she did not resist. She rose quietly and followed them through the narrow stone corridors. Each step echoed softly as she walked toward the courtyard where the execution platform had been prepared. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Officials, guards, and witnesses stood in silence. There were no grand ceremonies, no royal music, only the quiet awareness that a Queen of England was about to die. Catherine climbed the steps of the platform slowly. The wooden block stood before her, the same simple object she had practiced with during her final days in the tower. For a moment, she looked around the courtyard. Perhaps she thought of the life she had lived only months before. The laughter in the halls of court, the attention of the king, the brief moment when she had believed her future would be filled with power and celebration. Now all of that had vanished. Witnesses later described her final moments as calm and composed. She did not scream, and she did not struggle. Instead, she knelt before the block and spoke a few quiet words, asking for mercy for her soul. Then she placed her head down. The executioner stepped forward and raised the axe. One swift motion ended the life of the young queen. In only a few seconds, Catherine Howard disappeared from the stage of history. Her rise to the throne had been fast, brilliant, and full of promise. Her fall had been just as swift, shaped by secrets, suspicion, and the ruthless power of the Tudor court. If you want to explore more dark and fascinating stories from royal history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next journey into the past.